this is a situation, a crisis in Argentina that really exposes some of the many contradictions that we have to live with these days in our financialized world. On the one hand, is there too much debt to be repaid, given the fiscal capacity of the Argentine state? Yes, for sure, there is a problem. And the problem can only be solved at this point using financial means. Now, where does that come from? It comes in part from the fact that there's been a collapse of some of the markets in which Argentina participates, and the prices of commodities in those markets, what it sells to other places, that's all been deeply problematic. And so there was a growth model that was a different kind of growth model that indeed the Macri's predecessors put in place. It had its problems, but it was popularly supported. Ran into a wall, and Mr. Macri steps in and basically plays the game according to the rules as they are put forth by the global financial powers. He was actually kind of a poster child for the way that a country like Argentina is supposed to react once they fall into crisis. He was doing all of the right formulas, bringing in the IMF, all of these kinds of things. That's why it's surprising then that we see this declared crisis for the successor of the regime that spent too much. So actually, they're already in the process of resolving the problems. When you're in that situation, you should be able to basically have an adjustment program that lets you go forward. The fact of the matter is, though, that the situation was worsened by the speculators, the global speculators, that have savagely attacked the Argentine peso and used it as one of the many fronts for gains-taking and for short-term profit-making in our hyper-mobilized, hyper-globalized financial world. There's a game that's played that's called riding the bubble, where basically if you know that a given asset is on the way up, or if you know that it's on the way down, you can make gains by jumping in early, jumping in late, taking positions that you know will be a little bit ahead of where you think things are going. You also know that your other competitors are going to crowd in, and as they do, you'll basically, if you can guess where they're going to be in a kind of game theoretic sequence, you can make a lot of money even though everybody knows what's going to happen. The result is that we see not a downward adjustment of the Argentine peso, something that's deeply problematic for living costs and survival for the people of Argentina, but we see basically this utter collapse of the peso driven completely by the fact that in a world of quantitative easing, of low returns, and of slow growth, those who have money in funds to burn or to invest, in a world in which they're unwilling to invest, and there's no good projects they can think of, and in which public sectors have their hands tied, they go for these easy kills. Now, something more to be said, and that has to do with the fact that the Argentine situation is not alone. We have Turkey, the case of Turkey. We have other currencies that are coming under attack. And actually, in my talk with the students yesterday, we exposed some of the structural problems that are really at the front of this whole phenomenon. It's very common for those analyzing the situation from afar, especially many economists who look to explanations that focus on behavior and so on, to look for flaws, look for a problem or an incentive. This one took money, that one was corrupt, etc. And of course these are problems that are in the world in which we live, but fundamentally that's not the thing. And furthermore, it has to be remembered that in the case of the Argentine debt, this was debt inherited from before. What we expose in the class is that since the crisis, there's been a complete reversal of the net trade position and current account position. Actually, it's called current account and investment position of the advanced economies and the emerging economies. The advanced economies were previously basically, in deficit, and it was the emerging economies that were in surplus. And so that means that basically, if you're in deficit, you have to borrow from the other side of the world. That would, for example, be the case of the U.S. and borrowing from everyone to sustain its consumption. Not a problem because it's the U.S. That's reversed. We now have seen, since 2012, the exact opposite, wherein it's now the advanced economies that are in net surplus and then the emerging economies that are in deficit. So essentially, when you remove the U.S. and China, Japan, Netherlands, you still get to the same, and Korea for that matter, you still get to the same conclusion. So that means that essentially there has to be borrowing. It's just structural. It's the way things work, and it has to do with Germany having a great surplus and Netherlands and not being willing to stimulate more, so that these global imbalances simply are facts and have to win out. And that means that economies in the developing world that are targeted by speculators are going to be exposed to these speculative attacks because they're basically, it's a game of who's going to go next. And what you know is that the entire block of nations is exposed to this risk. A balanced world would not create these worlds, but we're not in a balanced world right now.